Hey guys, welcome to a weekly story time. If you like these story times, give this video a like, leave a comment, let me know down below what you think, and subscribe if you're not already. All those things really do help out the channel. But if you want to support what we do, help us continue to do it while also getting bonus content, the best place to do that is over on Patreon. So a link to our Patreon is down below for you. On this week's story time, I want to talk through a correction that I recently received and how that went and really the circumstances around it, and really talk about, does correction really fix my mood? Does this really fix my attitude? Because I think that some people might think that if you just have a bad attitude and then you undergo a spanking, you're just going to come out of the spanking with a bad attitude. And I can say for me that that's not the case. I think that if you go into a spanking with an attitude and you come out of a spanking with an attitude, that's more of an indication that the spanking should have continued, not that the spanking wasn't effective. It wasn't effective because it just wasn't long enough, if that's the case, or maybe not even, it may not have been hard enough if that's the case, because I will say that in the past, when Coda would spank me and I would come out of the spanking with an attitude, there were many, many times in the past where he didn't continue the spanking, he didn't repeat the spanking, and it just led to a worse and worse attitude, and typically it would lead to some arguments or misbehaviors that just kind of undermined the growth of our relationship. And so now he definitely has the mindset that if I come out of a spanking with an attitude, he will just immediately repeat the spanking or offer correction, depending on what he determines is the best choice in that moment. But I definitely am not allowed to continue to have an attitude after my spankings now. And so spanking really does fix my attitude. So the circumstances around the spanking is kind of what we talked about. It actually is this situation that we talked about in the podcast this week. And that is that I was having a really hard day. Some things happened between my daughter and I, not that I had a hard time with her. She was having a hard time. I was trying to help her regulate, and the process of trying to help her regulate made me dysregulated. And I remember, like, Coda, we had a big miscommunication around this whole situation, and it was just something that we had a really big misunderstanding between each other about the role of correction and spanking in our relationship. And so Coda came off as being kind of irritated, I guess you would say, that I had allowed my daughter's demeanor and attitude to affect me as severely as it did. I can kind of understand where he's coming from, because he wants me to be able to kind of just let those things happen and not let it affect me as much as it does sometimes. But at the same time, I'm like, okay, but it did affect me, and I need the correction in order to be able to move on from this and be able to re-regulate myself. And he wanted to figure out a way to help me, like, learn how to regulate without correction. And I was like, but the way I regulate right now is with the use of correction. And so it just became a big misunderstanding. And what was the hardest part about all of this is that this misunderstanding, this miscommunication was happening before I had correction. And so the conversation was not as productive as it should have been. It was not as useful as it should have been, because I was so dysregulated while trying to have this discussion. I think that in the future, we should have had the correction first and then talked through everything, because I think that if we were both in a place of being more regulated, it would have been better. And so that was kind of the learning big takeaway from this, is that correction works. We need to lean into it. We need to lean into our systems. And right now our systems do include spanking as a form of emotional regulation, and being able to kind of change demeanor and offer that correction. And so we need to lean into that more. We need to lean into our systems. We need to kind of default to spanking more for those purposes. And also, we need to do the correction first and then talk through what we're thinking, how we're feeling. Because after the correction, Coda also noted that he was feeling more centered in his role and more capable of leading the conversation. And that just wasn't the case before the correction as much. So we were having this hard conversation. We were having this big miscommunication. And I just remember it got to the point where my attitude was so bad that I was like, I just don't even want to do this anymore. Not domestic discipline, the correction at hand. I'm not ready to call it quits on this whole relationship dynamic. But I just remember like the correction in that moment, I was like, I just don't want to do this. That was not an option. Kodo basically was like, we're doing this. And so he did the correction. And at that point, he just used the rosewood paddle. He used the cane. And it was kind of a hard correction. It definitely, it was hard to get through from the standpoint of, by that point, I was so just emotionally worked up, emotionally dysregulated. And it was hard for me to submit to the process initially. I will admit that it was kind of hard for me to submit to the process because I had allowed myself to become so dysregulated. And because we had that conversation beforehand that felt like just a huge miscommunication, it was hard to submit to the process. But I got in position, I received the spanking, I really tried to focus my mindset on recentering myself in my role, letting go of all of the negative emotions I was feeling, and really focus on accepting the correction and submitting to the process, submitting to Coda. That is my focus when I am receiving maintenance, and that is my focus when I'm receiving corrections for attitude and demeanor. And sometimes I will quite literally say that to myself in my head, to accept and submit. Accept and submit. And I just kind of say that over and over again as I am receiving the spankings, so that I understand that I need to let my guard down. I need to accept the sensation. I need to accept the correction. I need to accept his authority. And then I need to submit myself to it. And by doing that, I was able to get to where I needed to be within that correction. I was very concerned with how the conversation went, how dysregulated that I was. I was so concerned that I was not going to get to where I needed to be within one correction, and that he was going to need to continue. That is not something that I ever want to have happen, but sometimes that is what's needed in order for me to get to where I need to be, in order for me to be successful in accepting the correction, submitting to the process, and being able to move forward in a positive way in my relationship. And so I was really concerned, but I was able to get to where I needed to be in that correction. So he did a minute on each side with the rosewood paddle. And by the time he was done with that second minute, I really had let my guard down. I had started to more emotionally cry. Like I had just started to just really cry through that process. And it was more of an emotional process during that time because of the heightened emotions of the evening, because I was dysregulated, because of the conversation that we had, the miscommunication that we had. I don't like having miscommunications with Coda, because even though they don't divulge into arguments anymore, it kind of carries that same emotional weight as arguing does. And I just really don't like being in that place with him. I really like to avoid that if at all possible, and I really do try. And so I was just releasing all of that emotional weight, and it was coming out in the form of tears. I was crying so hard by that point. And then he did the cane, and he did that a minute on each side. And the cane is just, it's intense. And he definitely wanted to make sure that I got what I needed from that correction. And so it felt more intense than even it does normally. So by the time he was done with that, I was definitely feeling it. I left that correction quite sore. I felt it for quite a while. And I felt like I had been completely made right in my relationship. My dysregulation was completely gone. I felt so grounded and emotionally stable. I felt secure in my relationship. I felt supported by my head of household. I just felt like everything had been put back where it was supposed to be. That, you know, all these pieces that had kind of fallen off the map essentially had been restored back to where they needed to be. I felt like I could handle fulfilling my responsibilities, that I could come back under Coda's authority, and it just felt good. It just felt good to feel like everything was back in place, that everything was back the way it should be, that I could handle it, and that I felt joyful again. And I know that that seems kind of weird to think, like, you just went through an intense spanking. How do you feel like happy and joyful again? And I just don't know how to explain that emotional process. It's the process of letting go of all the negativity and letting go of the weight of carrying those emotions. And by letting those emotions go, and by letting that weight go, by letting myself just be led through that process and accepting that Coda is my authority and that I need to come under that authority, and that my job is not to, you know, decide and, you know, figure it out. My job is just to submit to Coda's decisions. That's so freeing, and just being free of the weight of the emotions, being free of the negativity, and being free from having to figure things out. It just creates this sense of security and this sense of just being taken care of, and that just makes you feel happy, and that makes you feel taken care of, and that makes you feel all these really positive things. And it just created a sense of understanding my role and understanding my position, and being able to live within that with a sense of just lightness. And for Coda, it was really helpful because it helped him understand that he needs to take that authority and be measured and be controlled, and not let things frustrate him, not let things get out of hand, that he has the control to put an end to things and to impose these consequences. And so it really helped him kind of feel more empowered in his role as well. And so it was a really good thing for both of us. And yeah, spanking really does fix your attitude. It really does fix your mood. And it really does work for me and for many, many others I've talked to. And so I think that that is where I'm going to end that. I hope that you enjoyed this story time. I hope that you got something out of it. Let me know down below what you thought, and we will talk to you next time.